everyone. Thank you for joining session 1 of Long Talks in the Woods. If you'd like to know more about what Long Talks in the Woods is and who we are, head over to longtalks.ca to explore other sessions and find lots of resources that relate to what we talk about in the session. I try to post journal articles, news links, podcast links, video files, so there's there's a variety of ways to engage with the topics and with learning. So I'm recording this in June of 2020 as we are trying to get all of our sessions recorded and posted to the website. But this session originally was held in January of 2020 at the Hastings Highlands Public Library in Maynooth, a wonderful place that we hope to be able to hold these sessions again when it is safe. So in that first session, I shared some personal context for the session that I'm about to share again now. And I'm going to share it because I am not here doing these sessions as a disembodied student, researcher, academic. My academic journey is deeply tied to the life that I've lived, the people I share this life with, my identity and my communities, and the places that I have been fortunate enough to call home. So I'm going to share with you how I found the field that I've become a part of, which is ecological economics. So some of you watching may know I had a small chocolate business based here in Hastings Highlands. A few years ago, it had sort of grown to its capacity at its scale, and I was faced with the choice of scaling it up into a much larger business. But I did not have the skills or the knowledge to manage investors, run a bigger business, manage lots of employees. So while I was making chocolate bars for markets, I also went back to university online to get some training in business management. In one of my required gen ed classes, which was basically a class about climate change, though it had a much fancier name, pardon me, I had a revelation that seems quite simple now, but at the time really clarified things, which was that this human activity that we talk about causing climate change also has another name, the economy. And all the work that scientists and researchers and communities and groups around the world who were working to combat climate change, all of this meaningful work is being sort of actively thwarted by the economy that we are all part of, whether we care to be or not. So this was a big deal to me at the time. I had given up on climate activism, essentially, when I was 15, which is a pretty long story in itself, but it was clear to me even then that solving the climate crisis, or the greenhouse effect, as it was called in the 90s, was not really just about raising consciousness or changing hearts and minds, as a lot of people have suggested. As a kid, I could barely convince people who didn't doubt the veracity of climate change to make even the slightest changes like recycling or buying local. I thought there's a lot more going on here because nobody wants to contribute to environmental degradation, and yet so many of our actions make it seem like we don't care either way. So I just tried to live my own meaningful life through what I told myself would be a slow climate apocalypse. But when I had this moment of, it is the economy that produces climate change. And also I was reading the IPCC reports and other economic reports, and I thought, this is it. It is the economy. And if the work of so many people around the world towards averting climate disaster is to be successful, we have to change the way that the economy works. So at the same time, I was taking micro and macroeconomic courses, and I discovered for myself that there might be a few reasons why our economy produces climate change and why it is so difficult to reconcile climate action with economic policy. Because the way that our economy works and is structured is due in large part to what we believe the economy is and who gets to make decisions about what is good for the economy. And the way that economics is understood in traditional and policy world does not include the biosphere or the world around us or the fact that we live on a planet of finite resources. The economic theories used today were developed hundreds of years ago when the world seemed infinite and resources seemed infinite. Even the early theorists who could understand that there were planetary limits, they said, oh, we won't have to deal with that for a long time. So when economic policy is made, it counts money and labor in a model that has no physical limits. I thought there has to be a more accurate and useful way to understand the economy and economic decisions that we make beyond this current mainstream interpretation of economic theory. So I went searching online, and finally, after quite a lot of searching, I found ecological economics. And so after I finished my bachelor's degree online, I trained a new chocolatier and sold my chocolate business. And I went to the University of Leeds in the UK to get a master's degree in ecological economics. And I got to work with some really exciting and brilliant people who were way ahead of me in the whole economy-climate connection. I graduated in 2018 and immediately began a PhD program at McGill University called Leadership for the Ecozoic, where I'm working with some of North America's eminent ecological economists. And this is what I've been doing for the last few years. And I'm pretty excited to share with you some of the work that's being done in ecological economics, because it changed the way that I understand the global ecological crisis. And it offers a meaningful framing for working towards what I think most of us desire, a meaningful life on a livable planet. Though I know that economics is not necessarily going to be what speaks to you in your experience of climate crisis and what we should be doing. We all find our own path. I'm not trying to say that we should all become ecological economists, so that would be excellent. More like, here's a meaningful lens that allows for a more democratic shaping of our economy and our world, so that climate action we desire can actually have impact. And I am not an expert. I'm still learning about all of this, and I love talking about it, and I hope to share that with you today. So now I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can make this work in a reasonable fashion. Okay. So hopefully you are seeing a beautiful picture of a forest and long talks in the woods. And yes, as I said, the session was given originally on January 23rd and 24th in Maynooth. And now here we are on the internet. So the economy. A lot of different people and groups talk about it as though it is clear what we mean when we say the economy. Here are just a sampling of some headlines. On any given day, the economy is referred to in the news a bunch. And not once in any of these articles does anyone define what they mean by the economy. And partially it's because that's not an easy answer. So people have been talking about economic matters forever. The oldest form of writing we know of from ancient Sumer, 5,000 years ago, where Iraq is now. This writing was for accounting, keeping track of transactions and surpluses in grain. 2,500 years ago, Buddhist nuns in what is today India were writing poetry about the divisions of labor that affected their well-being and how productivity was valued in different spheres of life. Aristotle and Plato and Xenophon wrote about oikos and oikonomia, the root word for economy, about 2,300 years ago. But when they wrote about economy, it meant more of household management or livelihood management than what it means now. But the economy as a sum of human activity is a new idea. So while thinking about and discussing what we call today economic concerns like wealth and trade and commerce, those have been around for a long time, nobody talked about the economy or had a conception of it the way we do today until after the Great Depression. At this time of massive crisis in the 1930s, it was clear that the financial problems and unemployment and inflation and hardship were all tied together, but it was not clear how. So a statistician named Simon Kuznets came up with a method to count all of the financial productivity of a nation, GDP, or gross domestic product. This was a big deal, and all of a sudden it was possible to conceptualize all of the production and sales in a national economy. Better yet, it could be distilled down to one number. How is the economy? Is asking what that number looks like. Is it up or is it down? Became good or bad? So in this perspective, you could say that the economy is how and where and how much money moves around measured in GDP. But if we only think of the economy as what is produced for sale and the money we move around and spend, we don't see the whole picture. If instead we think of the economy as all the ways we meet our needs and wants, then a more complete picture of the total material and energy usage of the human economy emerges. Because we don't meet all of our needs in the market or with money. The economy isn't just the market. Like if you stay at home to be a caregiver, if you grow a garden or collect firewood, these activities don't take place in a market. They aren't counted in GDP, but they are absolutely fundamental to meeting our needs and contributing to well-being. This is invisible economic activity if we only think of the economy as money exchanges. If we limit our understanding of what the economy is to money movement, then we only study money, measure money, and make policies about money. If we think of the economy as something more, then we look at a much bigger picture. So here are some ways that the economy and economic matters have been discussed. So there's the interdependence of reciprocal relations to meet everyone's needs, the name that we give to how human beings acquire, process, and distribute what we need and want for our lives, the way that we produce goods and services, distribute the incomes generated in the process, and consume the things produced. These things are different. One is about relations and meeting people's needs. One is about how income is generated and spent, and one is about the process of how we meet our needs and wants. So over on the right, we have some statements on what economics studies. In one, it is studying wealth, and in the other, it is studying human behavior. And none of these up here are wrong per se, but they reveal different orientations that will lead to different tools and different conclusions. So why does it matter the way that we conceptualize the economy? What is the difference if we think about it as how we meet our needs versus how we generate wealth? Well, it is important because a lot of policy is made based on economic decisions. As our man Keynes said here, the world is ruled by little else. Economics informs national industrial policy, is part of nations deciding to go to war or not. It decides trade policy, who gets grants and for what, and what kind of development takes place as a national or local strategy. So if you take the value of a human life, which seems tacky to some of us, but insurance and governments calculate it all the time. This can be calculated in a number of ways, but it is usually tied to what your worth is in generative income as compared to your risk of death. So when policymakers think about raising the speed limit, for instance, they consider the number of increased deaths weighed against the savings of driving time as it impacts overall productivity. Will it be good or bad for the economy to raise the speed limit? In this case, what you think the economy is will impact that decision. Is the economy just money? Is the human experience worth more than what it contributes to GDP? Is a forest worth more than its weight in lumber? So we come to ecological economics. And the big idea here is that the economy is embedded in society and society is embedded in the biosphere. This starting point means that what is measured is different from GDP. What is looked at is more than individual human behavior in purchasing things. And the goal of economic policy must be to include considerations of the biosphere and the complexity of this society and ecosystem relationship. Just for clarification, the biosphere is a sort of thin band around the surface of the earth where all of the things that are alive live. And so other guiding questions in the school, in schools of economic thought have been, how do we grow national wealth? Or how do we reduce unemployment? Or how do we maintain economic stability or avoid inflation? The guiding questions of ecological economics is how can we govern economic activity in a way that promotes well-being, justice, and long-term deep sustainability. So the history of this field is that it began as a movement. In the 1970s, when the first alarm bells were being rung far and wide about climate change, persistent pollution, and environmental crises, species loss, more, a lot of people came together to work for a common cause. These were scientists, systems ecologists, economists, energy and system theorists, and more all came together to try and incorporate studies of material flows and energy and thermodynamics into an understanding of the economy in a world in crisis. Not unlike the crisis of the Great Depression, leading economists to refocus their work towards understanding why unemployment, financial markets, inflation, and human suffering were connected. The global ecological crisis we are experiencing in the form of climate change, increasing social inequality, financial deregulation, ecological destruction are all connected in ways that require new forms of economic thinking. So in 1989, the journal was established to explore these big goals and ideas and sort of explore how they could shift the way we make policy decisions. And these are some of the founders of the field pictured here at the bottom of the slide. So this ecological perspective of the economy, when we end up with key concepts that perspective entails and what tools they are related to. There's a lot of information here on this slide. I spent essentially an entire year sorting through these ideas on the slide. So it is a lot and you don't have to process all of it right now. There's a lot more information on the website in the resources section to dive a bit deeper into some of these. They are all interrelated and I'm gonna go into a bit of these in the next slides. And we're gonna touch briefly on them, but if you don't get them right off, that is fine. And it's an ongoing learning process. So thermodynamics and throughput. Really quickly, first law of thermodynamics is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form or be transferred from one object to another. However, the second law of thermodynamics, which is significant in ecological economics, tells us that every energy transfer that takes place will increase the entropy of the universe and reduce the amount of usable energy for work available. This means that when we use energy in some way, it is converted in some parts to useful forms, and some of it is converted to less useful forms. So living things are maintained by a constant input of energy, but this is offset by an increase in the entropy of our surroundings. The more energy that we use, the less is available for use in the environment around us. So the Earth is a closed system, which means it exchanges energy with its outside surroundings, but not matter. Aside from a few meteorites, the only thing that goes in or out of our planet is solar energy. And this is lucky because it means we are not just using up a completely finite supply of energy. We have energy inputs into the planetary system, but they are not nearly enough to compensate for how much we are using. So ecological economics began as a thermodynamic understanding of the economy, the fundamental assumption being the entropy approach to economics, that economic activity is a process of increasing entropy. So what is entropy? This is not going to be a super precise answer, but for our treatment of it today, it is a way to conceptualize available energy for work. A low entropy material has a lot of utility. We can harness a lot of work from it, and a high entropy material is disordered, meaning we can't get much work from it. Oil is low entropy, but plastic that has been recycled 5 times already is high entropy, meaning there isn't much more we can do with it. So here on the left, we have the Earth. The square represents the entire human economy made up of people, all of our stuff, our animals, our society. So in meeting our needs, pardon me, and wants, we use energy and material from the biosphere, we process it, we use it, we transform it into waste materials, whether in the form of carbon dioxide, from energy use, or plastic or garbage that goes into a landfill. So there, here on the right is a visualization of the material throughput of the human economy. So all the material we use worldwide to do all of our human things. Starts on the left with lots of available energy and usefulness, and by the time it is over here, it is waste. The materials we use from the biosphere are fundamentally changed by the time we are done with them. So the idea is that the really critical information we need to pay attention to in constraining or informing our overall economic activity should be in the form of various environmental indicators, which all sort of reflect what is a habitable planet and one which is not. So this is where a ton of science relating to Earth systems processes come in by saying that there are limits beyond which we run deep risks to our very survival, and that risk cannot be measured by price mechanisms. So the price of a thing cannot relay information about nonlinear ecological thresholds. Our activity is primarily, so right now our activity is primarily limited by price, sort of telling us whether we can afford to do something, and recognizing that there are planetary boundaries that we need to pay attention to shifts the policy mandate away from letting the market take care of our future to maybe using all of the knowledge we've been accumulating for thousands of years to help us continue living on this planet. So the Earth systems indicators identified as the most critical for climate change are biodiversity loss, our biodiversity loss, climate change, nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, ozone depletion, ocean acidification, freshwater use, change in land use, atmospheric aerosols, and pollution. Crossing any of these boundaries could be catastrophic. There are more resources on the website about this if you want to do a really deep dive on the science behind these thresholds, if this is intriguing. So, value and commensurability. The process of valuation, or assigning value to something, is generally in the policy and economic spheres to be a process of compressing information about attributes into a single metric like dollars. This is about making decisions and making it possible to compare things which are different. Ecological economics takes the general position in saying that price is not the only metric worth talking about when discussing the economy. And if price and dollars are what we discuss and distill the human and ecological experience down to, we lose very important information. So solving the climate crisis is not just about getting the prices right in the economy. In fact, a lot of research done in ecological economics shows that if you treat the value of everything on our planet as commensurable or exchangeable or substitutable, you could end up with what looks like a healthy, growing money economy on a totally uninhabitable planet. So value is often discussed in terms of capital. What is important to understand is, sorry, let me just quickly, nope, my bad. What is important to understand is that capital is just a way of looking at the world. We have human capital, which is considered the human labor force and productivity, social capital, which are things like trust, community connection, culture, manufactured capital like bridges, buildings, things, financial capital, money, and natural capital, which is essentially the biosphere from which we extract materials and energy and which processes our waste. So we could talk like any of these key criteria for a long time about value, valuation, and commensurability, but very basically, the idea with value and commensurability is that these values, like natural capital and financial capital, are not interchangeable either conceptually or materially. You cannot compensate public trust, a social capital, with money. So the problem with this is that it makes decision-making hard and policy proposals difficult if you can't reduce the value of everything to a price. So the tools that are used here are multi-criteria analysis, which allows for comparing different valuation metrics. I found out recently that there are some municipalities in Ontario using multi-criteria analysis in decision-making as a replacement for cost-benefit analysis as a way to incorporate these incommensurable values. Here on the bottom, I've put a picture of a tree, which has a value placed on it for what can be sold in a marketplace as lumber or firewood or board feet. However, this tree obviously has value to us that is not told in monetary terms. It is stabilizing the planetary climate systems through carbon sequestration, through producing the air we breathe, through maintaining habitat for other living beings, to say nothing of the value of this tree beyond how we value its direct and indirect contributions to our well-being and survival. There is critical ecological and social value that cannot be compensated for with money. So the economy is a complex system. A fundamental concept of a systems approach is that complex systems have emergent properties, that they are more than the sum of their parts. A mechanical system, like a car, is complicated, but you can understand every part of it because it is a linear additive system. But complex systems like ecosystems or the human body or economies are more than the sum of their parts. A key distinction between complicated and complex systems is that it is easy to fix a complicated system, like more or less. You can identify the problem and replace the part. In a complex system, because of its emergent properties, identifying the problem part is difficult. To try to understand things that are more than the sum of their parts, there are tools like systems dynamic software and agent-based modeling to identify relationships and scales of the system in question in order to make interventions for change. What is significant in taking a systems approach is to pay attention to the relationship between things as much as you pay attention to the things themselves. So a lot of what I'm saying probably sounds very sensible, but I assure you, this is not what is considered within mainstream economic theory and not what informs most economic policies. Part of taking a systems approach is connected to different scales and levels of inquiry. What do you study in order to understand the economy? With an ecological perspective, what do you look at to do research? So some of these things that are important parts of understanding the economy are individuals, households, firms, markets, communities, institutions, countries, bioregions, and ecosystems. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have changed that yet. So, and this is where a lot of other schools of thought come into play. So institutional economics, post-Keynesian economics, neoclassical, behavioral, international, and ecological understandings of watersheds and bioregions are all part of contributing to looking at different units of inquiry. So some of this informs the way that we understand economic activity. The reason I buy a car is not because I have an intrinsic desire for a car or that I was born loving the internal combustion engine or a brand or whatever. I have a car because of the geography of my life, the broader community that I live in, the history of settlement patterns, and many other things. Here in Hastings Highlands, we don't live in a walkable or bikeable community, most of us. Institutional choices, history, community, family, and the forest all affect the way that we meet our needs and indeed the needs that we even have. In current mainstream economic thought, the population of people and the consumption of goods is studied as preference and only looks at individual behaviors. This is the framing that says that you are individually responsible for the carbon footprint of your t-shirt or your car or your Facebook account. Ecological economics, in studying many levels of inquiry, engages in research that more meaningfully shows the effects of culture, family, geography, institutions, and more in how our economy works, and more importantly, where the meaningful intervention points are for regulation or for change to get the results we might desire. So, normativity. To say that something is normative is to say it states how the world should be. You are trying to create a vision. A lot of economics and science attempts to position its legitimacy in saying that they are not normative, that they describe the world the way it is, and that it describes natural laws. And this is part of a much larger discussion being had in the philosophy of science. But basically, everything that we do is normative, whether we are conscious of it or not. Ecological economics is a field that is explicit in stating that there are no neutral positions from which to assess the economy. Economic policy and the economy should be just, should contribute to well-being, and it should be able to do this without economic activity, making the planet uninhabitable for us and many other beings. The policy goal of using an ecological perspective of economics is a steady state economy. This is generally considered to be what ecological economics or economists are aiming towards, though there is some debate about what steady state means, and that debate is very important and interesting. Generally, steady state refers to the throughput of energy and resource use, that what is extracted and used must not exceed the regenerative capacity of the ecosystems we live within and part of, and that whatever goals or progress we are interested in must remain within these constraints of resource use, waste minimization, and reducing social inequality. But because we are already beyond a number of thresholds of resource use and waste production, beyond what our ecosystems can process or regenerate, part of aiming towards a steady state economy requires a period of degrowth to scale down aspects of the economy which are particularly resource, waste, or energy intensive. And this is a political issue, as almost everything. What to do is already established, which is exciting. We don't need new technologies or some major innovation to live within our planetary means as humans. When you hear people talking about needing new research or new innovation, what they desire is an innovation that allows for maintaining the structure of wealth accumulation the way it is, so that people can still solve poverty with more economic growth instead of a responsible redistribution that requires us to care for one another. Researchers have already established the technologies and practices that will be effective in preventing a 4-degree increase world or a 2-degree increase world, but the problems are implementation and the kind of transformative social change that it requires. Again, we are told that this is a huge social shift to talk about moving from goals of economic growth to goals of steady state economy. And perhaps it is as big a deal as they say. This is a much larger conversation about power. But the people who say it is not possible are often people who benefit the most from our economy being structured the way that it is right now, who profit from inequality and environmental degradation. So I don't put all of my faith in their ability to have the longer term arc of justice in their sights. Steady state and degrowth are things that we will be talking more about in other sessions in the future. So I'm not going to get really deep into it here, except that to say that it's the general policy goal of ecological economics, based on quite a lot of research that demonstrates the incompatibility of human futurity on this planet with continuing policy goals of economic growth above all. Which brings us back home. A lot of what I've spoken about is clearly relevant at national and international scales of policymaking, but it is important to also bring it into our space and see what it means at our community level. So I just said that economic growth is incompatible with a habitable planet, but what does that mean for local initiatives to grow our economy here in Hastings Highlands? So back to the very beginning, if we think of the economy as the ways we acquire, process, and distribute what we need and want for our lives, this is a really interesting question at the local level and is different from a national scale. If we don't think of the economy as ecological, or our local economy as more than just money, we risk just adding more transactions and money to our lives and thinking it's better, which I concede that some more money would make some things better. Yet everyone who's watching could probably tell a story about how their well-being comes from much more than just money. Growing our local economy might then mean increasing our capacity to meet our needs and wants, as opposed to just bringing more money into the conversation. And our needs still include global things like a livable planet, political stability, justice, and travel. The way that we meet our needs is the economy, is far beyond mere dollars and transactions. It is ecological. It is situating ourselves, our families, our friends, and community within the social and the biogeographical. We are deeply interconnected with the world around us, from the material to the spiritual, metaphysical, emotional, and historical. Thinking about our local economy challenges us to think what we mean by local. Do we mean our soils and our lakes and our creeks and our rivers, biodiversity, friends, families, colleagues, and future generations? Meeting the needs and wants of what is local is a very profound conversation. And increasing our capacity to meet our local needs becomes then a practice of recognizing our relationships, valuing them, and incorporating an ecological sense of local into our decisions. So you have all been, how do I get out of this? Okay, so you have all been very patient, probably, with my, if you're still watching, my very long-winded explanation of what essentially boils down to, we have to pay attention to more than money when we think about the economy. And I just wanted to thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more sessions. We hope to have these all recorded and posted on the website in coming weeks. And stay tuned for upcoming sessions throughout the summer and into the fall on longtalks.ca. Thank you.